Now, as I'm sure many of you remember, last spring this fellowship voted to support the First Principle project. Now, essentially, the first goal of that project was to promote a discussion about our first principle and its implications, with the hopes of expanding it from being the inherent worth and dignity of all people to the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. Now, to be clear, we did not vote to approve the change, only to expand the conversation and allow this discussion to expand to the wider Unitarian Universalist community. And because our fellowship and 24 others agreed to pass this along, delegates to this year's General Assembly in New Orleans will vote to make this an association-wide discussion, which may or may not lead to a proposal to change the principle. Now, from one perspective, simply changing the words and meaning, the words is meaningless. If we aren't actively wrestling with the truth and implications of that change. Oh, sure, we can just make the change, but if we aren't having that discussion, wrestling with it, then what good is the change? So the discussion that we voted to expand, discussion that this proposal is generating, to me it's the more important aspect of the project than actually changing a few words in the UUA bylaws. That being said, I feel that making this change would be an important step in the right direction for Unitarian Universalism. Now, personally, I find our principles, well, they're actually rather ineffectual. They are wonderfully agreeable. In fact, I've never met anybody who would oppose them, at least not in any strong sense. Which begs the question, if our principles aren't the least bit challenging, are they effectual? Why do we have them? I think it might be beneficial to have a set of principles that continuously and endlessly challenge us. Our agreement to affirm and promote these principles, written on the wall, written in many places, our agreement to affirm and promote these principles, that's all we do. They do not bind us in any way to live by them. We are not bound to them. They are just things that we generally agree upon. And we make that statement. We agree on these principles. Years ago, I think my son was just a couple years old. I was serving as a chaplain in a camp for high school students. This was in California. And so I was the chaplain, and my role was essentially just to just hang out with different groups, get to know the kids, and they had their own leadership meetings, and I would participate in those, and just kind of do a check, and I did some worship services and did a few other things, but pretty light duties overall. But my favorite thing was actually to attend the meetings with these kids, and we had some issues come up that forced the youth that they had to make some decisions. One of the youth broke an important rule, and they had to decide. The other youth were deciding what the punishment would be and what would be the repercussions of that action. They had to decide to send him home early. And in so doing, of course, his parents would know, his minister would know, his director of religious education. It was serious implications. And I remember this group of youth, aged 16 to 18, I think the ones that were in leadership, they used our principles in such a serious way. They wrestled with them. They had them out in front of them. It says, well, okay, but we have this principle and we have this principle, and here and there was conflict in them, and they had to wrestle with all our principles. They were actively using them to make important decisions. I don't see too many adults in Unitarian Universalism doing that on a regular basis. And that's why for myself, I've chosen a statement of faith that challenges me to wrestle with what it means and how to live it out in daily life. Now, faith, as I understand it, I said it's a statement of faith. So faith, as I understand it, is not a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Now, that is prejudice, what I described, literally. I took the definition for prejudice. I cut and pasted it out of my computer's dictionary. And unfortunately, that is how far too many people understand the word faith, as something you've just prejudged to be true. Now, generally speaking, a belief is anything we accept to be true, whether it be because of evidence or in spite of evidence. And it can be rational or irrational. There are any number of belief systems, some religious, some philosophical, some scientific. And they serve as the lens through which we interpret and interact with the world. Faith, on the other hand, is the ability to take action in the face of uncertain outcomes. Where beliefs are oriented toward our thoughts and can be described with words, faith is a felt experience that most often defies explanation. Faith is grounded not in the certainty of our beliefs, but in our doubts. Without the courage to face our doubts and our fears, without that courage, it is difficult to grow in faith and reach our fullest potential as human beings. It's really easy to profess a belief in the comfort of our homes or the safety of our place of worship. We believe this, we believe that. Hallelujah. However, the more difficult task of integrating our beliefs into our daily life, that requires courage. It requires faith. As we attempt to integrate our beliefs into our lives, our beliefs will be tested. Something's challenged. And doubts arise. They will arise inevitably if we're living them. And then to act in spite of these challenges, in spite of our doubts, that is faith. So I have made a statement of faith. 3 words. Life is divine. Short, sweet, incredibly challenging, and annoyingly difficult to live up to. Every single day it forces me to consider the effects of my actions and my inactions. My words, my thoughts. For me, it actually combines our first and seventh principles into a single statement and adds the challenge of living up to that word divine. What does it mean to even say that life is divine? And as I ask the children, what is life? And we've established certain criteria and characteristics of life. Kids were good at pointing those out, but there's growth and development, homeostasis, adaptation, organization, reproduction. We interact with the world. All these different things were made up of cells, and there's all these, like kids were really good at it. They probably went through every one of these criteria for life, these characteristics of life. But there remains no unequivocal definitions of life, the cause of life, the why of it. This remains beyond our understanding. How did life emerge out of inorganic material? How did carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, how did all this give rise to a conscious being capable of asking these questions? How did it do that? Why did it do that? Why did life emerge from inorganic materials? Why did consciousness emerge in living beings? When inorganic compounds gave rise to living cells, the cells included the individual characteristics of those compounds while transcending the characteristics of those compounds. As individual cells evolved into more complex organisms, they still included those individual cells, but they transcended their abilities that they had alone. And when one of those complex organisms, when it achieved consciousness, it transcended and included everything that preceded it. It was able to do so much more, to think ahead, to remember history, to love, self-sacrifice. A conscious being that had faith, willing to take action without knowing where it might lead. And then consciousness evolved, and it followed the same pattern of inclusion and in transcendence. It included what came before and transcended it in some way. The human brain, it has the components that directly reflect our evolutionary history, with each level including what came before while transcending the possibilities of what came before. We have the lizard brain, the mammal brain, and the human brain. And too often we aren't living in that human brain. We're in that autopilot over on the left, that lizard brain, the fight or flight. Or in that mammal brain of emotions and habits. Not often enough in the neocortex, where language, abstract thought, imagination, consciousness, reasons, these all exist there. And just because it's there doesn't mean we're always using it. To imagine that we have reached the pinnacle of intelligence in this universe, the peak of consciousness, to imagine that evolution is completed in us, that is hubris defined. And when I use the word divine, all I'm saying is that which transcends me. That which is beyond my understanding and beyond my ability. That is what is divine. It is transcendence itself. So to say life is divine is to say that it has transcendent qualities. Qualities that cannot be explained through objective means alone. We cannot explain why life developed out of rocks and why consciousness developed out of cells. Those are transcendent qualities. And to say life is divine is to say, is an acknowledgement that we are not the pinnacle, that evolution is ongoing. And all the objective tests in the world cannot begin to answer the why of it all. Divinity, transcendence, it's a subjective experience. And utilizing the full range of human consciousness, we can experience the transcendent quality of life, of being itself. Have you ever considered where our inherent worth and dignity comes from? Why do we say that? Why do we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people? Is it just so because we say it's so? Is there a reason that we say this? I'll be honest with you, I've asked lots of Unitarian Universalists that same question. And most don't know. It's just something they believe. But yet, we can be sure that our inherent worth and dignity exists. And I say it is because we are each and all part of a much larger whole. Because life itself is a transcendent quality of existence. It is our relationship to the whole, our unique contribution to the web of life that bestows worth and dignity upon us. Just for being alive, we are important. So does not every form of life contribute to the whole? Isn't every form of life as wonderfully miraculous as any other? Every form of life has transcendent qualities. In my statement of faith, it forces me to face that truth every day. And while struggling to live up to what that statement implies. And it is a struggle. One that I fully expect to never fully master. Most of you are probably familiar with a man named Galileo. He was a seeker of truth. He was convicted, not on the merits of his claims, but rather the challenge it offered to accepted doctrine. Galileo was proven to be correct. Even the church admits that now. But what he did, he had an inconvenient truth. It was inconvenient to the church and to the paradigm of that day and to the ruling class and everybody there. So it challenged the paradigm of his day. But an inconvenient truth is still the truth. And the more I learn about our objective reality, the more I explore subjective consciousness. The more I do all that, the more I have to say that life is divine. Not because it is what I want to believe or choose to believe, but it's where my pursuit of truth has led me. Divinity was a word I had given up. I did not appreciate how others defined it. But in my own search for truth, I found it again. So often words like divine or sacred or even prayer being so misunderstood and misused, they are dismissed out of hand, even though we read them every week as part of our own affirmation. Like books or movies we read when we were young and encounter again as an adult, I have found that these words have the ability to change and grow with us. Now, I'm not interested in converting anybody or to convince you that I'm right. I don't need that. Because the truth of my statement isn't dependent on anything else. Doesn't matter if anybody else accepts it. It only matters is if I find conflicting truth, that I'm forced to address it. So I'm not trying to shove my statement of faith upon you, but I do invite you to consider a statement of faith of your own. One that can change and grow with you on your own quest for truth and meaning. Doesn't have to be long. Doesn't have to be complex. It only needs to challenge you. It doesn't even have to be permanent. You may change it tomorrow. But try it for a week. Make a statement. And then try to live up to it. And if it's too easy to do that, step it up a notch. Make it hard for yourself. Let the doubt creep in and play with it. The search for truth is our sacrament. It's sacred. And in a day, and in a world where truth is being kicked around like a football, it's important that each of us is grounded in our own truth and working every day to live it the best of our abilities. So be it. Amen. And blessed be.